Cultural Studies from NAIITS in 2017. After 15 years of pastoring an urban Anabaptist congregation, I decided to step aside to make way for capable younger folks to take it to the next level. I'm currently in a vocational pivot, a liminal period to consider what I'm being called toward as I begin my 5th decade in life. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you. Get my presenter on mode, because I got to read this, you know what I'm saying? Well, should give me in my presenter mode, eh?
Did you put it into your notes?
No, I don't mess with that. Like where, let's see. Cool, I'm just hanging out real quick, making sure my dongles are all talking to each other.
It should be okay.
My displays, eh?
Oh, to go dual, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no mirror. Where's my thing? There it is. Thank you. We up there? Oh my gosh. Cool. That looks good.
What if you have to get to your paper? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I can just go. Thank you, Danny. Thank you for the warm introduction. It's so nice to be back at NAIITS. And it's and Danny's coming. Oh, I gotta be up, huh? I'm like 6'8". Power forward. Okay. How we doing? And Danny, one more other thing. What time are we done?
Oh, we have to be out of here by 11:30.
That's cool. Okay. That could be good. Okay, dzień dobry. Minamimi Joshua Grace Szcześniak. Jestem z Polonia, Buffalo. Mieszkam w Philadelphia, w Lenape Hawking. Moja rodzina Podjoski, Jamala blisko Kraków. Good morning, my name is Joshua Grace Szcześniak. I am from Polonia, which is the Polish diaspora in Buffalo, New York. And I've lived in Philadelphia, which is the land of the Lenni Lenape, for the last 20 or so years with my family. Originally, my father's grandparents are from the region of Lesser Poland, in the area of Krakow. I'm glad that this symposium began with land acknowledgements, and then so many sessions keep doing it, so I just want to resonate again that we're here by the generosity and hospitality of the Mississaugas, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and many other diverse First Nations and Métis people. So here's kind of what I'm trying to go for. Cool long words and titles. It's an academic paper, and it was an opportunity for me to use some of these words that I had to pay a couple $1,000s to learn. But what we're talking about is how settler colonialism and white supremacy interrupt our ways of knowing. And that's a concept that I'll explain a little bit more. Here's like the cool abstract that kind of just gives that sense. But what we're really talking about here is how we learn, how we acquire knowledge, and the limits of that knowledge. We were given a good way to be able to do that by a creator, by traditions and cultures, and white supremacy and settler colonialism interrupt that and try to impose new limits on it. What is appropriate, what is good and healthy, what is beautiful. I'm a very, very, very basic speaker of my language, so I apologize if any of you are Polish here and you are gonna be offended by that, but I'm trying. It's a beautiful language. It's also counterintuitive for me. Does anybody know anything about the Polish language? Sweet. The most similar language is Czech, and I just wanted to give you this little beautiful word, which means departure. And does anybody, on the count of three, let's all pronounce it together. 1, 2, 3. Wyjazd, who said that? Yeah. I thought you didn't know anything about Polish. Huh? Shh. Shh. Nobody wants to go out and just say at the beginning, like, I'm watching you, buddy. But essentially what I'm trying to do is, talk about this ways of knowing pedagogy of the land in particular, and how important story is, and how important the land is to how we learn and how we're formed, and then get into white supremacy, settler colonialism, because there's so many different sort of angles, and I'm kind of looking at that more as like normative monoculture story stuff. That's precipitated in me these learnings and NAIITS and whatnot to do a ancestral homeland visit. I got to go to Poland for the first time over the winter, and had an amazing time with the food and the people, and had some kind of, I don't know, sort of metaphysical ancestor stuff go on that I haven't fully unpacked, but I think is fun and interesting. And when it gets to the end, I'm suggesting that my journey could be useful, especially to settlers in North America and in other occupied places, and how we exist in this tension between we're from somewhere else, and there's medicine there for us, and there's traditions, there's good things, and yet I'm a person who lives in this place as a guest. And how we navigate that, I'm going to make some suggestions about that, but how to be sent back to the places that we inhabit with good relations, and try to do it in a good way. And then some of the projects that I'm working on now as a result. Okay, so ways of knowing. The simplest thing for like Christian people, I think, is to make fun of a sacred song. Do you know the song "Jesus Loves Me"? I hate that song. I'm sorry if it was written in a really precious way to comfort sick kids and stuff. So that's the sensitive part. But Jesus loves me. This I know, because why? Okay, the Bible tells us. Okay, I learned that song before I could read, and I used to just sing it as a little cute dopey Joshy. And do you understand, or could you understand, as you know where I'm trying to go, how problematic that is already? Centralizes the written word. Jesus loves you because, well, also it's like the Bible tells you, like the Bible talks is also kind of creepy to me, but that's how we know Jesus loves us, is because somebody somewhere else read it in a book. I can't even read it. My mom told me or something that it's in the book, so you're good. It illustrates a metaphysical assertion of boundaries that the colonial state imposes on how we acquire knowledge. Where do you know, like, how to get to lunch today? Is it because there's signs on the walls and the sign told me to go to the room? There's a lot of other ways you can figure that out. You can use your nose. You can follow the herd. It's a place that you've been before, and you could make your own way. We don't necessarily just need this centrality of the written word to let us know things as important as that Creator loves us and embraces us and wants to comfort us. Most of us, let's do some cool. This is Lesser Poland. In the winter, I got to go in the winter too, which was even sweeter for me, I guess, because I'm from Buffalo, and I think that sometimes when it's like cold and snowy and frosty, that's like the truest experience of a place or something. But that's just me. Most of us don't question most of the time how we acquire knowledge or the methods that we use. We just know stuff. We learn stuff the way that we were taught. So even today, we're exercising a privilege to consider abstract concepts like being and knowing, including the scope and validity of those methods, but I hope that they aren't just abstract, but they're getting us down not only into our bodies and in embodying ideas in community, but it is the land, it is place as our teacher. And we're here to challenge standards of methods, validity, scope of knowledge set out by the colonizers by learning some old ways. As Ritzka and Martineau put it, this means the task of decolonial artists, scholars, and activists is not simply to offer amendments or edits to the current world, but to display the mutual sacrifice and relationality needed to sabotage colonial systems of thought and power for the purpose of liberatory alternatives. Oops, this is a cool series. Oh yeah, and the slides, I've been working more and more as an artist, particularly with street art, and most of my slides will be Polish street art. So like murals and cool stuff like that. So I hope you enjoy it and aren't just too distracted. So rather than one overarching and grand story that guides the world, which is what white supremacy teaches, right? That it's a good project, the progress works, humanity is going in a healthy direction, and it's all, one story. The church gives this universality of story all the time. Say like, yeah, there's all this stuff going on, but at the end of the day, there is this sort of bottom line capitalistic thinking of it's all going to happen the same way. Even activists, like climate activists, can fall into the trap of that thinking, saying things like, we are destroying the earth, this is all gonna, change, thinking that the chaos is gonna happen the same way in every place at the same time. But as you start to peel away those layers and away from the generality and towards the very specific of place, realize that there's many different stories. How people are affected by climate change and climate chaos is very different. If you live in a mountainous region or if you live on the coast, if you're in my neighborhood, it's close to sea level, and in 20 years, I'm probably gonna have about a foot of water to walk through to work every day. But there's many stories. So I'm gonna try to even keep using that kind of language about narratives. And when I'm saying narratives, I'm doing it on purpose to have a multiplicity of perspectives, a multiplicity of experiences. To get at the issue of this white supremacist settler colonial narrative, we need to understand that what some of the problem with white people is. I don't fancy myself an expert on white people, although I do have a bunch of white friends. I've worked for white people. I've spent time with white relatives, and the white people see me and they embrace me as a white person very often. But white people have some problems, and one of them is they're unable to understand this multiplicity. They're unable to have an empathy because of their imperial gaze, and it is hard to dismantle. George Monbiot is an English economic philosopher, and he says a string of facts, however well articulated, has no power to correct or dislodge a powerful story. The only response it is likely to provoke is indignation. People often angrily deny facts that clash with the narrative truth established in their minds. The only thing that can displace a story is a story. I would go a little bit further than him though, because I would say the only thing that can replace a story are stories. It doesn't have to be like, well, that grand narrative is wrong, this grand narrative is correct. I think what we actually need to do is embrace many stories and perspectives with empathy. So our new narratives or meta-narratives. Generally, the term meta-narrative, I think, was used to say, like, yeah, this is the story about our stories that kind of pulls it all together in a new, encompassing way. But I also like how people use it when they're talking about, like, the meta-narrative that we're building in this room right now. NAIITS has this sort of its own arc that's been going. You're involved with it. You have your own arc that you've been doing. It's kind of all pulling it together. But to form new meta-narratives, they don't need to be invented now as if the past doesn't matter. On the contrary, our new meta-narratives need to grow older. I long for more appropriate amplification of traditional wisdom, values, and stories of First People, showing how we experience life. Kituwa scholar Randy Woodley, who's been my main teacher over the last couple of years, articulates these new yet old meta-narratives when he says that the story, our story, is about a party, a community involving all people in all parts of creation. The party is demonstrated by carrying out justice and righteousness among our fellow humans and all her other creatures. It includes the earth herself and all of her resources. It includes the remaining indigenous peoples. Shalom in the community of creation, life as God intends it, awaits our embrace. So I'm hoping that we're going to try to do some embracing. In order to justify replacing the population on a specific land, Europeans developed norms that could be used as measuring sticks of other cultures. And this is kind of part of the framework that they laid out to be able to say that their ways were better, that their religion was better, the ways that they dressed, the buckles on their shoes were better, or whatever they were trying to do. But they emphasized the value of the written word and fact-based written accounts of history. Just as a little aside, Polish history starts in 966 when the king became a Christian. And Poland's been super Catholic ever since. It's one of the most religious countries in the world. It's estimated that about 90% or 98% of Poles are Catholic, and 90% of them go to church every week, at least once. So it's like, it's very, very religious place. But everything pre-966 is called prehistoric Poland, which is a trip for me because I'm like, was it really that? Is that prehistory? And prehistory to me, I'm thinking of like dinosaurs and stuff, you know? Not necessarily like my ancestors who did earthworks that we can still see and, you know, and still have festivals and still have styles of dress, still have this, you know, semblance of the same language. But by devaluing orality as a means of intergenerational communication and denial of land as a teacher, the colonizer attempts to limit how we learn, relate, and understand. Donald Fixico says it thusly: the story holds an important place in native cultures and has multiple purposes for learning and sharing traditional knowledge. The story has power and energy, and it brings the past into the present. Oral tradition is not oral history. Rather, it's the process of oral expression via speech, oratory, argument, and story. It's more than oral history and invites criticism from linear scholars, especially historians, depending on the printed word, and they devalue the oral tradition of American Indians. For American Indians, stories live on and they will live longer than all of us. As the stories live on, so does the land. And rather than holding a commoditized view like most European settlers, indigenous ways of knowing rely on the land. Leanne Simpson explains it like this. She says, it's when you're coming into wisdom within her Anishinaabe epistemology, what that looks like is it takes place into the context of family. Place is community, place is relations. It lacks overt coercion and authority, values so normalized within mainstream Western pedagogy that they're rarely ever critiqued. The land is both context and process. Yo, Donnie, could you throw me that water bottle that's right in front of you? That's pretty good. I play power forward. Which, by the way, did anybody watch basketball last night? What was going on? All the Raptors had to do was get by the Sixers. And it just seems like all doors are open to them now. But it took 7 games and 4 bounces. Okay, so real quick, just some stuff about like white supremacy and how I'm kind of thinking about it. White supremacy describes forces that make it normative for us to slide towards protecting whiteness, and whiteness as bestness. And in the United States especially, but even globally since November 9, 2016, it's become more popular to make overt white supremacist remarks publicly, hold publicized white supremacist gatherings, and for politicians to defend violent actions by white supremacist groups. White supremacy socializes us to censor whiteness, the white experience, and especially white feelings, without having to call anything. White supremacy, we call it normal. In the States, we call it being American. This is white supremacist. This white supremacist monoculture exists to profit the few at the expense of the land and the peoples of that land and our minds. But to get hundreds of millions of people on board with this project that continues, it requires a good story enough to hold indirect influence by a system of values and thought, also called hegemony. For those who live in settler colonial states such as the US, Canada, New Zealand, the lands now known as Australia, we need to not only learn from our first peoples and the land, we must learn about the methods of our oppression to resist and overcome them for our healing. Real quick, just differentiating colonialism, neocolonialism, and settler colonialism. They're all reliable tools of the oppressors to increase their power, their wealth, and their influence. There's many variations, some are direct and indirect, they have nuance. But the colonizers' vision for the earth has become so problematic that climate change, the increased rate of species extinction, both animal but especially plant, and growing lack of biodiversity means to make the earth less hospitable and soon less habitable for life. To unravel, especially human life, to unravel its grip upon the land and upon us, we make distinctions between them. John Mohawk says that colonialism is everybody's problem, everybody's enemy, when we struggle or assist in the struggle against interests that are external to those of the people who live in that place that's affected. We're moving in a direction that supports the development of human rights, of resistance to colonialism. So when a group of people exercises their political dominance over another group, including rights for economic exploitation of the land, it usually requires direct military control or imperialism. When there's a colony, there is a colonizer, and therein exists colonialism, a sovereign from somewhere else who imposes its will upon the land of the people. Borders change, places get renamed, a new dominant language often gets imposed. Neocolonialism happens when political power gets transferred to the people at some limited aspect, but the economic exploitation occurs or it continues through so-called legitimate means. The study of the colonization of Africa and the liberation of those states is a good example to see even like how the borders in Africa are drawn up and how many like straight lines there are, and where people groups are kind of like just cut apart and stuff. That's because of the way that, in 1883 and 1893, the European powers just drew it on a map and imposed it. Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of Free Ghana in 1957, says that the essence of neocolonialism is that the state, which is subject to, in theory, is independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from the outside. So when you have nations who are, say, paying back IMF and World Bank loans at the expense of social uplift locally, look at who controls the diamonds in South Africa, who controls mineral mining in Congo or wherever, there's very specific examples all across it. Settler colonialism includes the arrival of colonists, people distinctly from another place to settle, to make economic use of the land, and to set up new identities often for people. one little thing about the history of the United States and settler colonialism, as we ponder, just take a breath for a second and just wonder with me, in this talk, in this moment, in our meta-narrative, are we going to get somewhere? Is this getting to where it would be good? A quick history thing, though, about the U.S. In 1763, when the English had, outmaneuvered France in some kind of ways, and now had political authority over certain amounts of land. The Proclamation of 1763, which some people call the Indian Magna Carta, the king really pissed off the Jefferson and those other problematic people by saying that the British colonies were not to settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. This was protected. The colonies are here. And the more, if you just pull on that thread a little bit more and just think about what they did in the next couple of years, how irritating it must have been for Thomas Jefferson, who had this dream for this nation that spanned from sea to sea, that the king was imposing limits on it, to say, no, over there belongs to other people, you're only here. Okay, here's a little bit just about kind of waking up. I'm a Polish-American settler on Turtle Island. I live here as a guest, and sometimes that relationship is confusing. I didn't choose conditions of my birth, my original family, although I do choose to actively undermine the systems and the lies beneath those conditions. Ignorance of our nation's history and systems of our national narrative. This narrative myth support and only perpetuate injustice and maintain roadblocks to our greater healing. So here we are, and I still have white thoughts. Do you know what white thoughts are? White thoughts are when somebody describes a story about a massacre, and your thought says, there's probably violence on both sides, wasn't there? And that's a white thought. When somebody describes their trauma, you just have a filter of whiteness that makes it so hard for you to empathize and believe somebody, because there's got to be some nitpicky little thing, some detail that you focus towards. Because if you believed the people who were oppressed by your continued privilege, if you believed their stories, you couldn't maintain life as it is. You could not maintain the trajectory of just benefiting on the backs of genocidal attempts and continued genocide. When I got to go, oh my gosh, were we 11:15? We're supposed to be out of here? Oh man. Oh, thank the Lord, Martha, for that you're watching. We're gonna wrap this up because we should chit chat some. Here's just a cool, interesting story, right? So in North America, my family's been here for about 100 years, mostly in Buffalo. I'm the first generation really to get out of Buffalo. Second largest Polish population in the US. So going back to Poland, I was like, I'm gonna go find some graves with my family names on them. Not only are they're kind of common names, but to do family lineage stuff after you have World War I refugees who adapted into this whiteness a generation and a half ago, is really, really difficult to just do the family thing. So what I actually got to experience when I was visiting places was something that was harder to explain, and I'm not totally sure what it was all about. But I was out at one of the earthworks because Polish people built mounds. There's two particularly old ones from prehistory. Some people say they're from the 1st century BCE. Some people say they're from the 800s. They've been excavated, and they found that in this mound that's 16 meters high by 60 meters wide, there's sand and dirt in it from dozens of miles in every direction, because when they built the burial mound for King Krak, the founder of Krakow, they carried the sand and the dirt in their sleeves from these places. So there's been 2 more earthworks over the last 150 years to sort of keep this going. One of them is for a revolutionary from the 18th century, Thaddeus Kosciuszko. And I went to visit his place, his cool mound outside the city. Cell phone dies. Polish is very limited. Not many English speakers around there, and the place was closed and the sun was setting. So I'm kind of like starting to panic a little bit. To get to my friend's house on the other side of Krakow, I had to walk about 15 kilometers. I just translated into metric out of respect for a place. This is part of the meta narrative, right? Thank you. So anyway, so I get out there. I'm like screwed. It's freezing cold. I didn't even bring my little paper map because I'm kind of a doofus. And I'm starting to walk down this is like one hill because Krakow's pretty flat. And I'm like, I'm just kind of going to walk towards the lights for a minute. And that panic, I know that like if I could talk to my wife right now, she would just be like, why didn't you bring a map? Why didn't you charge your phone? Why didn't, just these normal common sense things that she doesn't actually even talk to me that way, but I imagine her talking to me like that when I'm ashamed, So I'm out there, and I'm walking down this hill. It's getting darker. Nobody that I'm finding speaks any English, and I'm just kind of feeling screwed and lost. And I felt this sense. It wasn't quite like an audible voice, but it was definitely more than my normal sensory perception. Was that you're not lost? How could you be lost here? There's at least 1,000 years of my ancestors are part of this earth. And I felt held enough to stave off some panic, at least. So maybe I'm just doing my I'm tricking myself into thinking like that. But I just kept walking in the direction I was like, I think it's probably this way. And I got about, an hour into it or something, and going to all these little stores trying to find a landmark or something like that. And I had gone the correct way. And I got there with enough time to hang out and celebrate with some beverages with my friend. But it was profound that, so even for me, having this very limited connection to Poland because of all these other issues of the wars and the settler colonialism, et cetera, but to just experience a little bit of what so many people experience for generations and generations of a connection to a place. And then it increased my empathy. It increased my sense of urgency that we have to do intentional efforts. And sometimes those intentional efforts just have to be more specific to a particular place, to a particular people, to a particular family. And we don't always have to just solve the big problem with one swing of the bat or with one fadeaway jump shot in the corner as time expires, as it were. Thanks. Get to relive that for a couple more months. So having an experience like that, yeah. So it reminded me of this poem that actually one of a really brilliant artist and community leader, a Nodley woman named Cheryl Bear, wrote this poem that really resonates. I'm a ghost in my own land. You look through me as looking into frozen water. I exist in your imagination as a strong warrior, as a strong elder, as a thing to be admired and respected. But I persist in your mind as a drunk, as a thief, as an enemy to be feared or despised. I'm a ghost in my own land. You fear me because you do not know me. Only when I look like you do you tolerate me. But do not presume that the warrior is dead. Do not assume that the wisdom is buried and gone. I'm not a ghost. I live and I breathe and I love this land where Creator placed us long ago. The land recognizes me. I am good. I am clean. I have a strong voice. I have good words to share. I'm not a ghost in my own land. So the thing I want to end with is just a little bit about some of the stuff that I'm working on right now, and then we can cue up this video. Erna and I have been working particularly on this project to do some very particular restitution work and help other people get into it. Because there's so many, this is a Polish phrase that's very useful when you start talking about settler colonialism and stuff like that. Anybody think they can pronounce this? Put a little, I'm not going to say it because Terry's here and he doesn't like it when I talk so aggressively, but when, what are we gonna do when you get these situations? So I wanna show you a little bit of a video. And if you're a settler here, just please pay attention to your own white thoughts for a second, because I warn you, there's gonna be very specific information in this video that you are gonna think is not completely accurate. Somebody's gonna tell a story about being wronged, about being aggressively oppressed, and you're gonna wonder for a second, what did they do to provoke that? What kind of arrogant attitudes, maybe? They didn't come in with a friendly tone. There's gonna be some white thoughts coming up. And it affects us. So can we fire it up, and then that'll kind of wrap it up.
What would you do if a group of violent white supremacists forced you out of your home, took your job, pushed you off your land? In 2006, a white supremacist paramilitary group turned their .50 caliber machine guns onto Eilehei Farm. At that time, Randy and Edith Woodley were running a thriving education and cultural center, providing mentoring, leadership development, and job incubation for Native Americans. They had developed a holistic learning and cultural center that served both Native and non-Native people.
We were learning to be who we are. A lot of the things that we talked about was about healing ourselves, healing the traumas that we've been through, why our ancestors went through boarding school systems, why the pain is still there.
We come up with a model that addressed our people as whole people, with our values.
As Eilehei was growing and expanding its impact, a white supremacist group launched an intimidation campaign, which included firing machine guns along the property line, anytime, day and night.
It was just really scary. Just make sure we don't let the kids outside to play, and especially the boys. The boys were the ones that liked to go outside, and our house was full of windows. Randy, he contacted Fair Housing and all these different justice places, and no one would help us.
Watching my own children go through those things was probably the hardest part of it all.
And the question kept coming through my mind, is like, why? This is 2006, why is this happening?
So that was heartbreaking. I mean, this is a vision that I'd carried and really sold, if you will, to others for 5 years. All around the whole country, the United States and Canada, a lot of people were behind it, and it was a success. It was like nothing else that had ever been done in Indian country.
As a result, the Woodleys lost their income, and donors dropped off as they were no longer able to run their learning center. Eventually, they had to sell the property for far under its value and relocate to Oregon. However, the dream of Eilehei is not dead, and as Randy moves to retiring from teaching, the Woodleys are ready to resurrect Eilehei. They have found a property in New Mexico with land, a building that can function as a learning center and provide housing for students, as well as a farm and vineyard.
There's just been this sort of force moving us to northern New Mexico. I think because we have, over 30 years of experience doing the kinds of things that we've been doing and observing and talking about the kinds of things that we've been talking about and building the kinds of networks all around with the different people that we have now, that it just seems so exciting. Not a lot of fear at all. In this land, it really just sort of feels like it's calling out to me. And it's a beautiful land feels worthy of me living the rest of my life out on that land and continuing to do what we do. We want people to make this thing a success because Elohim needs to be a success, because our indigenous people need to be a success. And we've realized along the way that non-indigenous people can't really heal without our indigenous people, and vice versa. So we're in this together. We have to move forward together.
Elohe is the chance to help build a sacred space. In 2019, we need that more than ever. $350,000 is a big goal, but you can help make it happen. You can be a part of building a healing and learning space while setting an injustice right. The Woodleys have gathered, protected, and planted rare seeds on their farm, as well as seeds of hope in the hearts of others for generations. You can be a part of a resurrecting Elohe. And when Elohe is ready, come be a part of the community.
So that's pretty cool. And the new learning center that we're trying to get going would be just north of Albuquerque in New Mexico. And by the way, though, those pictures of young Redbird, though, oh my God. He's like almost 20 now, but he was cute. Love the little guy. What can I say? So doing a very specific project, like something like that, and we do need help with it, is not to say this is the one thing that is going to heal the world. This is the one Indigenous solidarity act that we should do. But it is an opportunity, and I hope that even with your own networks, if you're moved by something like that, that you would help other people to see if they wanted to get involved. And it's not just so Woodleys can do their cool thing, but it's for all of our healing. I'll close there. Thanks so much for coming and being part of this session and listening. If there's any comments, or if you want to fix something I said, because I was kind of hasty and trying to get through a lot of stuff. For depart, there was Vayast. It looks like wizard. That's why I liked it, because I like wizards. Let me see. Was there someone else? Fran? Thank you. This is another good Leanne Simpson quote that, if you didn't hear, we should ask Fran to give it to you again. But learning how to love creation right where you're at is super important. So practices like cultivating plants for me became really important about a decade or so ago. So in our little urban garden, which is, if you live, anyway, so cultivating medicines, cultivating food, participating in food sovereignty actions, such as we started a food co-op that took us 15 years or 11 years to get going, developing urban agriculture, local regional food, eating in season. But the more I put my own hands into soil every day, that soil, I think, even gets into my heart, and it forms me. It's a good question. And the quick version, because we're going to bust out of here, would just be, when white people, you ask them like where they're from or something, and they give you like a math equation, of like, I'm two parts, Scotch Irish, and like I have a dash of French in me, so, or whatever it is. Existentially, I knew I was Polish because I grew up in a Polish neighborhood with people, my grandparents arguing in Polish and stuff, so that was useful for me. But most of us, we have to do some bit of choice on that, of which stories we're going to sort of meander down. You can't do them all at the same time. So I think finding a story, whether it's like about how your relatives got here, has to connect, and then with the people of that place. We are in a sort of a hybrid situation though, as settlers. We're sick, and that's part of our sickness, is even not knowing where we're from or not knowing our culture, and we just adapt and acquiesce into whiteness and into this grand narrative that is destructive for us. It's destructive for our neighbors. It's destructive for the earth. Again, we good, Danny? All right, thank you so much, everybody.
Please. Yeah, that'd be great. Oh, cool.
And huge. Like how many hours?
A long time. I feel like Joshua was a lot taller than I was.
Let's see.
Hello. Yeah. I'm gonna just walk out here.
Kind of okay?
Seriously? No. Yeah, it is.
I told you, we can get you a little stool to stand on. Would that be better?
What?
Did you make your skirt too?
Yeah, I did. Last week.
Oh, wow. For you.
I was like, oh, I need a new skirt. My excuse. My excuse. Yes. Is this like, I'm really that short? No.
Hi there. I think we're going to get started. So if you want to find your seats, and I know the conversation at lunchtime is going to be wonderful because we haven't had time to process what we're hearing yet. So this is going to be great. I'm so excited to introduce Crystal. I'm a NAIITS student. Crystal's a NAIITS student, and we both lived in Labrador up until very recently. So finding somebody else from Labrador is like finding your family, and it was really a good moment when I realized that in class. Crystal Porter is going to talk on A Search to Belong, Cultural Reclamation on the Jesus Way. Crystal is a Newfoundland Mi'kmaq. She's third-year NAITS student at Tyndale and currently a pastor with the Salvation Army in Labrador City, soon to be moving. She's received a bachelor's degree in Christian ministry from Booth University in 2009. She's passionate about the Church's response to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Indigenous people's journey to reclaim their cultural identity. She loves spending time with her family, reading, and beading. Welcome.
Thank you. The land tells me who I am. Gwe Daluisi Crystal. Hi, my name is Crystal, and I'm Mi'kmaq from the west coast of Newfoundland, the traditional home of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. It's no secret that the mighty roar of the waves soothe my soul, and the smell of salt water and birch trees calm my wandering spirit. The taste of partridge berries and fish doesn't keep me too far from the island. I remember who I am when I'm home. And so Creator uses the land to teach me my place in this world. For Indigenous peoples, the land speaks to our identity. The success of colonization and assimilation throughout Canada is largely due to the relocation and separation of Indigenous peoples from their land and communities. For a long time, I struggled in this reality. I am Mi'kmaq, but like most of the West Coast Newfoundland Mi'kmaq population, my ancestors hid their identity, intermarried, and completely assimilated to protect our family against racism and inequality. Missing a significant part of my story, I have searched with the deep longing to find a place to belong. Sadly, I do not search alone. Thousands of Mi'kmaq people originating from Western Newfoundland stand outside the circle, longing to be welcomed in. Stuck between two worlds, they seek to discover a way of life that acknowledges the settler and unveils the Indian. Forced assimilation and years of secrecy, joined with relocation, has created a generation disconnected from land and culture. Shame and fear holds our identity hostage as we try to tell our story. And this is why I believe that it is to properly understand the journey that has led many Mi'kmaq peoples to this place, you need to know our history and our fight to reclaim federal recognition. It is only then that reconciliation and the reclamation of culture can occur. My people are not invisible, and our story is important. In light of this legacy, we need tools to help reclaim our identity. And one of the tools I'll be exploring is the Mi'kmaq creation story and how my Christian faith plays a significant role in the healing of our identity. This past semester, as I was taking a creation and transformation course, I had the opportunity to reflect on the Mi'kmaq creation story, and a part of my project was the beading of a particular narrative within the creation story. And so I'm going to ask Danny to come up. He's going to bring around my beadwork. And throughout my presentation, I'll be referring to it, but if you see questions that you have at the end and we have time at the end, I'd invite you to ask those questions. I write acknowledging that I do not speak on behalf of all displaced Mi'kmaq people desiring to reclaim their identity, but I am unable to brush aside the deep desire to share my story in the hope that it will help others walking this journey. There are moments when I fight against the hegemonic systems that would rather me ignore this dilemma, but I cannot hand over my power. I will not stop learning, and I will choose to keep talking. As settlers made permanent homes on the shores of Newfoundland in the 1600s, the Mi'kmaq had little choice but to assimilate. Fear ravaged the Mi'kmaq people as their sacred ceremonies, language, and ways of life were suddenly forbidden. The government encouraged intermarriage and forced Mi'kmaq people to deny their lineage in order to maintain personal land ownership. But no threat was greater than the looming thoughts of genocide. In Newfoundland, the settlers came with great force. The doctrine of discovery allowed explorers to overpower, subdue, and conquer indigenous lands with any force necessary. And as a result, the Beothuk nation did not survive. Whether through introducing foreign and deadly diseases, violent encounters with settlers, or starvation due to overhunting and overfishing, the Beothuk people met a tragic end. In 1829, Shana Didit, the last recognized Beothuk, died in St. John's. Her death symbolized the extinction of Beothuk culture and language. The painful story of the Beothuk became a powerful reminder of colonial powers. If the Mi'kmaq people wanted to survive colonization, assimilation was essential. In Newfoundland, there was a cultural emphasis on sameness and a minimalization of difference. These features are rooted in the need to avoid conflict, as cooperation is essential for survival. Mi'kmaq elders and parents strive to ensure safety and longevity for their families, and so secrecy became the most favored coping mechanism, which passed from generation to generation. Traditional language was not spoken, ethnicity was not acknowledged, names were changed, and sacred ceremonies were replaced with Christian gatherings. Soon, children and grandchildren did not know their Indigenous identity, rather learned in classrooms that the Mi'kmaq were brought over from Nova Scotia by the French to kill off the Beothuk, who was much lamented. Those who did not know their ancestry were discouraged and shamed into keeping the secret. If fear and racism did not sever Indigenous roots, Newfoundland history books clearly established the barbaric and savage ways of the Newfoundland Mi'kmaq, contributing to a deep-rooted shame in family history. These effective methods of assimilation were celebrated as the colony of Newfoundland desired to join Canada. On June 25, 1947, initial meetings took place between a Newfoundland delegation and a representative from the Canadian government. It was the goal of these meetings to discuss the union between Newfoundland and Canada. Although various topics were covered, there was no significant discussion with respect to the Indigenous populations of Newfoundland and Labrador. When asked if Newfoundland had an Indian problem, Joey Smallwood, a major political figure in Newfoundland, exclaimed proudly, "There are no Indians on the island of Newfoundland." Although reports proved the existence of Inuit and mixed-blood Indians in Labrador, the Newfoundland Mi'kmaq population was quickly dismissed. Subsequent meetings and follow-up discussions continued to dismiss any Indigenous peoples on the island. As a result, the Canadian government did not incorporate the Indian Act into official terms of union, and Newfoundland Mi'kmaq continued to live without any acknowledgement of existence. Retired professor and anthropologist Adrian Tanner stated that Joey Smallwood told the federal government that they, the Mi'kmaq, had all disappeared or had intermarried, and that there were none. Whether through ignorance or actual lying, he cheated them so that they were never recognized at the time of Confederation. In 1949, as Newfoundland signed the final documents to join Confederation, the Mi'kmaq people officially became invisible. They did not exist on any databases. They did not have access to any reserve lands, status cards, or federal programming. Some Mi'kmaq people would see this as a promising future, but a small circle stood in dismay, confused and disheartened. Excluded from life-altering conversations, the political and federal governments confirmed that Mi'kmaq peoples of Newfoundland did not have a place in the circle. It would take over 60 years with 4 decades of continuous fighting for the Federation of Newfoundland Indians to form the Qalipu First Nation Band. Struggling against invisibility, the FNI had to confront the perception that Indigenous people were still living in Newfoundland and provide subsequent historical data to prove that they were not indeed immigrants to the island, rather present before European settlers. In 2011, an ordering council established an Indigenous landless band for the Mi'kmaq families from the west coast of Newfoundland. The name Qalipu was carefully chosen to represent the Mi'kmaq people who were displaced. Traditionally, the Qalipu, or the caribou in Mi'kmaq language, was a basic means of survival for the Mi'kmaq. Every part of the caribou was useful. The meat provided physical nourishment, the hide provided clothes and shelter. More significant, however, was the natural migration of the caribou. The caribou did not stay in one area for their entire lives. Rather, they migrated to find food and shelter. They would roam creation to seek Creator's gifts. Similarly, the Mi'kmaq were caribou people following Creator for their survival, roaming across all of Mi'kma'ki and Turtle Island. Indigenous pride flowed throughout Newfoundland as Mi'kmaq people finally felt encouraged to embrace their long-concealed identity. Elders began to share stories, and families began to spend time establishing unknown Indigenous connections. Enrollment opened in early 2011 and would continue until November 2012. An overwhelming 23,900 successful applicants were processed and fully accepted by mid-2012, with approximately 80,000 applications being submitted prior to the deadline, creating one of the largest First Nation bands in Canada. However, the Canadian government did not anticipate such high enrollment numbers. To control the number of applicants, the Canadian government decided to place stipulation on previously accepted and in-process members. The Canadian press published an article stating that more than 100,000 people applied to be founding members of the Qalipu First Nation Band, but the Department of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada announced in February 2017 that out of the 100,000 people, that only 18,000 are eligible. In many circumstances, people who held their status card for 5 years would have their membership revoked. Fearful to repeat the mistakes of the first process, the Canadian government implemented a committee which would review all applications and determine a finalized founders list. To be consistent and fair, the committee developed a point system that would rank each applicant. In order to qualify with the new standards, the applicant would have to score 13 out of 27 points to required fields. And if you look at the paper later or afterwards, there is a table in there that kind of goes through all of the point systems. But the landless band, which recognized and celebrated their diverse members, now had 66 federal designated traditional Mi'kmaq communities. No reserve land, but 66 federal designated traditional Mi'kmaq communities. Points were assigned if you lived within, frequently visited, or actively communicated with members. However, the effects of discrimination, internalized shame, and assimilation left many unaware and disconnected from their communities. Just beginning to re-identify and learn ceremonial and traditional activities, members now had to prove through 10-year-old phone records, gas receipts, pictures of attending the ceremonies, that they participated in beading, fishing, berry picking, smudging, and various other ways of life prior to 2005. The same land that European settlers conquered and stole became the same land that the Canadian government used to determine status. The same traditions, ceremonies, and ways of life that the Europeans prohibited became the same practice that determined Indigenous identity. 520 years after European settlers first discovered the rugged shores of Newfoundland, colonialism continues to aggressively displace Indigenous peoples, creating a disequilibrium of power, and continues to show a shame-based identity. I live in that current reality. The majority of my family, excluding a second cousin, lost their status. The years that we spent researching and proving our ancestry was quickly tossed into the reassess pile with a rejected stamp branding our family copy. Any attempts to appeal the decision were automatically denied based on the lack of supportive documentation, even though we had previously supplied more than required. The final and official correspondence was clear. I was only a 3-point Indian, so I didn't make the cut. I know what it's like to live with that shame. I know what it's like to have someone tell me who I am, and when it becomes inconvenient for them, to tell me who I am not. I question whether I deserve a place in the circle and if my story is good enough to share. I wish I knew my language. I wish I knew more traditional teachings. I know I'm at a disadvantage, but my ancestors did the only thing they knew to survive. Assimilation protected my life. But now is a time to take back what is mine. What my grandmother struggled and strived to hide, I fight to acknowledge. It is time to expose the unjust colonial systems that threaten to tell me I don't belong and to reclaim my Mi'kmaq identity. The function of colonization was to create a divide between the land and the people. But as this process unfolded, the Mi'kmaq not only lost the land, but they lost themselves, each other, and their culture. My people exchanged their identity and hope for a future. They ensured our survival, praying that one day a generation would reclaim what was lost. And I hope to honor their legacy of wisdom and strength by being a part of that generation. One of the tools that I'm exploring as an Indigenous Christian is the Mi'kmaq creation story, and found within this narrative is a place to belong. As we learn about Creator in relationship with creation, it reminds the Mi'kmaq person that they have a sacred place in community. In decolonizing methodologies, Smith says that connectedness positions individuals in sets of relationship with other people and with the environment. Many Indigenous creation stories link people through genealogy to the land, to the stars, and to other places in the universe, to birds and fish, animals, insects, and plants. To be connected is to be whole. Introducing people to the creation story is giving them an invitation to be whole and providing a path for healing. And this is why the Mi'kmaq creation story is central in my Beat It project. Each bead, each element recognizes the sacred ground, our place in community, and its subsequent healing. The Mi'kmaq creation story is a path to healing. The knowledge keeper would traditionally stand on the banks of the river, gathering the generations together before he shared the sacred story of creation. The beat of the drum would invite people to sit and listen as the knowledge keeper shared in the 7 levels of the Mi'kmaq creation story. Each level would share the story of significant characters that would ultimately reveal our deep connection with each other. In the first level of creation, we are introduced to Gizuk, the giver of life or creator. Gizuk in Mi'kmaq means the one who is not made, or the one who gives your existence. This is an important detail as the Mi'kmaq have no story to explain the creation of Gizuk. They simply explain everything is made because of the Great Spirit. Niskam, grandfather's son, is the second level. Stephen Augustine, the hereditary chief in Nova Scotia, shares that grandfather's son gives us our spirit, our soul, and our shadow. Mi'kmaq tradition explains shadows as the ancestors walking alongside and protecting the individual. The direction of Niskam is south, as it helps the Mi'kmaq person acknowledge their connection to the ancestors. Our ancestors tell the stories of our people, and they are reflected in our bodies. When we realize their presence in our life, we are conscious that the intergenerational shame and pain we carry is not only ours, but it is theirs. But we also realize the strength of our people, and amidst forced assimilation, we are still here wanting to reclaim our identity. The third level is Osikkamu, Mother Earth. This is represented through the land on which the people walk and who also bears the spirit of our ancestors. The drum is a constant reminder of Mother Earth. As the Mi'kmaq hear the drumbeat, they hear the heartbeat of Osikkamu, the one who connects us to the land and who provides our foods, our medicines, clothing, and shelter. Without Mother Earth, we are unable to maintain the life that was given through Creator. Within levels 4 through 7, the story focuses on the various responsibilities or role of each character. The first two-legged Goosecap has been gifted the responsibility to demonstrate leadership, respect the teachings of the elders, and equally respect the vision of the young people. He consistently gives thanks to Creator, Grandfather, Son, and Mother Earth for his survival. And as he prepares fish or marten for sustenance, he asks permission to do so. Themes of community, respect, and gratitude and love are taught throughout Goosecap's journey. As grandmother Nogomi is discussed, we discover a clear and concise responsibility for elders to teach and share their knowledge so that the generations after them will know their place in the world. The nephew, Nadawasum, is portrayed as a strong young visionary, willing and ready to serve and help his family, a backbone to society. Niga Naga Nipgaziz, the mother. I'm going to say that again because it took me really long to learn that word. Niga Naga Nipgaziz. It's a wonderful word, and I'm going to use that a few times throughout. But the mother teaches Goosecap to passionately care for others without limit and without reason. And she is the inspiration for my beadwork. She brings color into the world. She teaches the beauty and the importance of each and every living thing. You see, from the moment the elder stands on the banks of the river to gather everyone together until the last moment when Niga Naga Nipgaziz is introduced, community is a focal point. Each character in the narrative is given a function within creation, and if that role is unfulfilled, creation is unable to attain harmony. If Goosecap chooses to ignore the teachings of grandmother, then he will guide nephew onto the wrong path. If mother neglects to show love, then Goosecap will never fully understand the importance of relying on someone else for their help. Each person has a place in the story, and if that role is unfulfilled, then all of creation becomes disjointed. Assuming this narrative continues to speak sacred truth to the Mi'kmaq people, then we cannot ignore that our nation is significantly wounded. People are missing from the community, and as a result, we are broken. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission explains that the process of assimilation profoundly disrespected parents, grandparents, and elders in their rightful roles as carriers of memory through which culture, language, and identity are transmitted from one generation to the next. Roles continued to be unfulfilled, and people no longer knew their place in community. This becomes one of the most painful and important realizations. A people created for community slowly learned how to survive without each other. But this was never Creator's intention. Community was always intended to be at the core. However, for displaced Mi'kmaq people with no formal land base or reserve, little community connections, and an inability to attend cultural revitalization groups due to distance and travel costs, this reality seems unattainable. To search for the community that owns you can be a difficult task when colonial structures coupled with shame and fear continually force you to question the validity of your Indigenous identity. It would be easy to close your eyes to any Indigenous ancestry and continue a path of assimilation. But we must do something, even in the midst of our own insecurities and fears. In the Mi'kmaq language, there's a beautiful concept of interconnectedness, M'sitnokama, all my relations. This sacred phrase acknowledges that we are not alone. We are connected with those before us, those living today, to the generations that will come. It carries the realization that there is a sacred connection not only with humanity, but with all living things, the birds of the air, the creatures of the land and sea. This teaching is important because in our disjointed society where displaced Newfoundland Mi'kmaq have had to adapt, adopt, and assimilate, we begin to realize that reclaiming our identity is for all relations. It is for those who are forced into secrecy. It is for those who are currently struggling to identify, and it will be for the strong, resilient visionaries who will continue to follow us. The journey to reclaim our identity and discover our place in creation will not be easy, but it is necessary. It was Creator's intention that His creation would live together in harmony, which is why I believe that the restoration of our identity correlates with the restoration of creation. One cannot be whole without the other. It is here that my worlds collide to create something beautiful. I used to make the joke that I was a Christian long before I was Indigenous, but now I see that Creator was preparing my heart for something greater. When I read the creation story of my people and realize the painful disconnect, my knowledge of Jesus becomes hope for my people. Wendy Peterson explains in her dissertation that globally, Indigenous followers of Jesus, through reclamation of culture and contextualization of the gospel of Jesus the Christ, have sought the ancient paths, looking for the good way that will provide a sense of hope and rest for their souls. Jesus, Creator's Son, redefines what it means to reclaim Mi'kmaq identity, as His teachings are transformative in the journey to restoration. In the very places that we face our shame and struggle to reclaim our identity, Creator has made His presence known. He graciously offers the life of His Son so that harmony can be fully achieved. The biblical narrative of creation in Genesis 1 and 2 explains the supernatural, unexplainable ability of Creator as He creates completely formed and fully functioning objects. With the simple action of speaking, Creator brings light to the emptiness, water and land and sky and vegetation, sun, moon, stars, birds, fish, animals, and finally humans. Humans are placed into a caregiver role, and it is now their responsibility to justly and carefully rule over God's good creation. The biblical narrative enforces the Mi'kmaq understanding that Creator and His creation are bound together in a distinctive and delicate way. Each person, each animal, each body of water, each mountain, each valley have been all created by the giver of life, and each has an important part in community. So when there is a disconnect in relationship, creation is incomplete. In Genesis, this disconnect is shown through the Eden narrative. Although placed into a caregiver role, the choices of first man and woman cause a breakdown in relationship. Randy Woodley in Shalom and the Community of Creation explains that the Eden story is not necessarily about human depravity as much as it explains what many Indigenous people understand as disequilibrium. The curse which covered creation resulted in a broken relationship between Ms and Nogama, and this relationship was in desperate need of restoration. And this is where the teachings of Jesus become essential. Jesus' role in community is to restore harmony through the reconciling of relationship. As a member of the Evangelical Church, the Salvation Army believes that the Lord Jesus Christ has, by His suffering and death, made an atonement for the whole world so that whosoever will may be saved. The far-reaching reality of redemption is often forgotten. The cause of Christ has been traditionally understood as a restoration to the broken relationships between God and humanity. But limiting this concept of redemption has limited the extent of our healing. His suffering and death restores a balance between Creator and all of His creation. Jesus was Creator's gift to heal creation. Peterson continues to explain in her dissertation that the gospel is reconciliation to Creator, to creation, to oneself, and to one's neighbor. As an essential dynamic of reconciliation, reclamation is a step towards the restoration of a healthy self-identity by Indigenous followers of Jesus. When we welcome Jesus into our community, we exchange the missing pieces of our identity and reclaim our place in creation. Whether it was the shattered relationship in Eden, the selfish endeavors from the Christian doctrine of discovery, or the inhumane treatment of Indigenous peoples, each moment in history when self was chosen over community, the need for Jesus intensified. Jesus understood the importance of community. He understood the importance of walking gently upon Mother Earth. In Him, we discover a sacred place in community, and our identity is restored. It's already been mentioned at this conference, but it is impossible to reverse the sufferings of the past. And it would be remiss to belittle the damage that the church has done. Richard Twist explains that the majority of Native Americans blame American Christianity and the church for the loss of their own culture and identity. Instead of the good news, our ancestors were fed the bad news. And like many of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, Creator gave visions and dreams of new people arriving in their lands. The Mi'kmaq tell a story of a young woman who had a strange dream before explorers or settlers ever reached the shores of Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq. It explained small islands with tall trees floating towards the shores. And I believe these narratives acknowledge that Creator intentionally prepared Indigenous peoples for the arrival of the gospel. But colonial systems never allowed Indigenous spirituality and the teachings of Scripture to coexist together in harmony. But Indigenous peoples deserve to hear the unadulterated story of Jesus. The church that was so loud in the past does not deserve to be silent as we struggle through the present. And I believe that the teachings of Jesus must have a significant role in the healing of displaced Mi'kmaq people and the restoration of their land. Jesus is the fulfillment of M'sitnokama, and in Him the brokenness of identity and the maltreatment of land becomes new. Following the teachings of Jesus and embracing His truth means that harmony can finally be restored. Experiencing Jesus without the limits of an egocentric, paternalistic worldview changes our story. The journey continues, and many questions are left to be answered, and the long-lasting legacy of colonization continues to weave throughout our story. But Creator Jesus has not stopped breathing life and purpose into my people. It will not be easy, and the path will be riddled with self-doubt and shame. It will require pushing against hegemonic powers to see value, resilience, and strength in our story. And although colonial systems will continue to separate our people from the land, although federal governments claim reconciliation as they simultaneously remove status from thousands of approved Mi'kmaq people, as point systems continue to divide communities, families, and friends, there's hope. There's hope for the 80-year-old Mi'kmaq woman ready to embrace her long-concealed identity. There is hope for the 30-year-old Mi'kmaq woman struggling to understand if she is Indian enough to claim her ancestors. There is hope for anyone trapped within the legacy of colonization to begin the journey of cultural reclamation. The reclamation of our Mi'kmaq identity occurs when we embrace Creator's gift of creation and respect M'sitnokama. In community, the pressure to become is exchanged with the security of who we are because community makes us whole. In Canada, there is an emphasis on becoming something, but as Indigenous people, even displaced Mi'kmaq people, we already are. Points cannot prove it. Hair and skin color cannot reinforce it. The government cannot take it away. I cannot let the Canadian government tell me who I am. I will not let my people's story dissolve into history. I will mourn that my grandmother was only given a few short years to reclaim her identity before Creator welcomed her home, but she continues to live on in me. Her wisdom and strength keeps me going through each painful and frustrating step. I cannot change the past, none of us can, but I will strive to leave a legacy that is better for the next generation. I have faith that a day will come when my people will stand together as strong and resilient Mi'kmaq people. But until that better tomorrow, my voice will continue to say, I am still here, I am Mi'kmaq, and I belong. Walalan, thank you. Thank you, guys. There will be no questions because I'm too nervous to answer them. No, I'm joking. I'm kidding. Oh, look, my Mi'kmaq elder comes near the front. Is there any questions? Is there any questions about the beadwork? I think you guys all had a chance to see it. Yes.